On my first day as a police officer, my partner asked, "Are you cool to shoot someone right now?" "What do you mean?" I gripped the door handle instinctively. Briggs had been on the force for 15 years and was supposed to be showing me the ropes. He had gray streaks in his hair and eyes that never seemed to blink. "Don't worry. If you listen to every word I say, you'll walk out of this alive." He pulled the patrol car into a rundown neighborhood on the east side of town. Broken streetlights and boarded windows made everything look abandoned. My training officer at the academy had warned me about Briggs, but said he was one of the best cops on the force. Now I was starting to wonder what best meant. Briggs parked in front of a house that looked worse than the others. Paint peeling off like dead skin. Front steps rotting through. The kind of place where bad things happened, and cops were too scared to show up. He turned to me with those unblinking eyes. "Turn off your body cam." It wasn't a request. Why would I do that? My hand moved protectively to the camera on my chest. "We're not supposed to ask questions, rookie. Just do it." His voice had an edge that made me comply. I pressed the button and watched the red light go dark. Everything we'd learned in training said this was wrong. Body cams were for our protection and the public's. But Briggs was my partner, and I needed this job. The student loans weren't going to pay themselves. We got out of the car and approached the house. Briggs moved like a predator stalking prey. Every step calculated, every movement deliberate. He pulled out his service weapon and I copied him, even though we hadn't knocked or announced ourselves. "Turn off your safety and be ready for anything." He whispered it like we were already in danger. I clicked the safety off with sweaty fingers. This felt wrong, but Briggs had 15 years of experience. Maybe this was how real police work happened. Maybe the academy was just theory and this was practice. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure anyone inside could hear it. Briggs didn't knock. He just raised his boot and kicked the door in. It splintered inward with a crack, and we rushed inside where everything was pitch black. No lights, no sounds, just darkness so thick it felt alive. The smell hit me first. Mold and something else. My eyes tried to adjust, but there was nothing to see. Just shapes that might have been furniture or might have been people. Briggs gestured for us to split up, which went against everything I'd learned, but I was too scared to argue. I went left while he went right. My gun was shaking in my hands as I felt along the wall. Each step on the creaky floor sounded like an announcement. "Here I am. Come get me." My breathing was too loud in the silence. Then Briggs screamed. Not a shout or a call for backup. A full-throated scream of terror that made me cream. I ran toward the sound, bouncing off walls and tripping over things in the dark. His voice came from somewhere ahead, still screaming. "Right there! Shoot! Shoot now!" I saw movement in the darkness. Shapes that shouldn't be there. My training took over and I squeezed the trigger. Once, twice, 6 times. The muzzle flash lit up the room in strobe light bursts. White powder exploded everywhere as my bullets found their targets. Then nothing. Just my ragged breathing and the ringing in my ears. The acrid smell of gunpowder mixed with something else. Flour. It smelled like flour. Briggs walked over calmly and flipped on the light switch. The room was empty except for 6 bags of flour with bullet holes in them. White powder covered everything like snow. No threats, no danger. Just me standing there with an empty gun and flour in my hair. Briggs examined each bag, counting the holes. He pulled out his radio and spoke in that same calm voice. "Yeah, they failed. They're too trigger-happy and turned off their body cam. They're dangerous to us. You know what to do with them next." I stand there frozen while flour settles around me like ash. My empty gun weighs 1,000 pounds in my shaking hand. Briggs walks toward me with those unblinking gray eyes and I can't move, can't think, can't breathe. He stops inches from my face and I smell coffee on his breath. We're heading back to the station now. His voice is calm and quiet. Too calm. Too quiet. "You're not going to say a word about what really happened here tonight." I nod because what else can I do? My legs feel like water as I follow him out of that house. The flour crunches under our boots. Outside, the cold air hits my face, and I realize I've been holding my breath. We get back in the patrol car and I'm still shaking. Briggs starts the engine and pulls away from the curb slow and easy. Like nothing happened. Like I didn't just empty my gun into bags of flour. "You're gonna write your report exactly how I tell you." He doesn't look at me while he drives. "We responded to a suspected break-in. You saw movement. You fired in self-defense." My mouth is too dry to speak, so I just nod again. "If you write anything different, if you change even one word from what I tell you, things are gonna get very bad for you very quick." The rest of the ride back is silent, except for the radio chatter. Normal calls, normal night. Like my whole world didn't just flip upside down. At the station, Briggs walks me through the report word by word, makes me read it back to him twice. I sign it with a hand that won't stop shaking. He takes the paper and files it himself, tells me to go home and get some sleep. Like I could ever sleep again. It's 3 in the morning when I get to my apartment. I sit on my bed, still in uniform, still covered in flour. My hands finally stop shaking enough to write. I grab a notebook from my desk and start documenting everything. Every detail. The turned-off body cam, the empty house, the flour bags, Briggs screaming about threats that weren't there. His calm voice on the radio saying, "I'm dangerous." I write until my hand cramps. Then I hide the notebook behind my dresser where nobody would think to look. Morning roll call comes too fast. I've had maybe an hour of sleep and my eyes burn. Briggs is already there with a piece of paper in his hand. A training evaluation. He hands it to me with a smirk that makes my stomach turn. The evaluation is brutal. Says I'm trigger happy, can't follow proper procedures, pose a safety risk to other officers. The sergeant takes it from me and barely looks at it before filing it away. Nobody questions Briggs. Nobody asks for my side. That's when I realize how deep this goes. How many people know? How many people are part of it? At lunch, I sit in my car in the parking garage where nobody can see me. I open my personal email on my phone and start typing a message to Internal Affairs. I write about the flour bags, about the turned-off camera, about the fake threats. But then I stop. The cursor blinks at me. I think about my student loans, $20,000. I think about my rent, first and last month plus deposit. I think about what you know what to do with them next means. I delete the draft, close the email, go back inside. That evening, we're back on patrol and Briggs has another test ready. We pull someone over for a broken taillight. Before we get out, he turns to me. Turn off your camera. I reach for the button, but don't press it. Just cover the red light with my hand. He watches me close. Those gray eyes calculating, checking. We approach the car and Briggs starts escalating immediately, yelling at the driver about respect, about compliance. He keeps looking at me, waiting for me to join in, to get aggressive. But I stay calm, professional. I run the license and registration, write the warning, thank the driver for their cooperation. The driver thanks me back, has no idea they were just a prop in Briggs's game. Back in the patrol car, Briggs is quiet. I can feel his frustration building. Good. After shift, I stay late in the locker room, wait until everyone else leaves. Then I pull out my notebook and write down every timestamp I can remember, every call sign, every dispatch code. If I can match these to the official logs later, it might help prove what happened. Every detail matters if I'm going to survive this. The next afternoon is my day off, but I can't stop thinking about that house. I drive back to the east side, park across the street. That's when I notice it. The house directly across from where we went in has a doorbell camera, one of those video doorbells that records everything. My pulse starts racing. It might have caught us going in, might have caught the gunshots, might have caught Briggs on the radio. I sit in my car for 20 minutes working up the courage. Then I walk up and leave a note. Just my personal cell number and a message about needing footage from 3 nights ago for insurance purposes. I don't mention being police. Don't know who might be connected to Briggs, who might tell him. The waiting is its own kind of torture now. My phone buzzes around 7 that night while I'm heating up leftover Chinese food. Unknown number with a local area code. I almost ignore it, but something makes me check. There's a video file attached and my stomach drops. I tap play and watch myself and Briggs walking into that house 3 nights ago. The angle is perfect from across the street. You can hear everything through the thin walls and open windows. Briggs screaming about threats that don't exist. Me shouting back. Then 6 gunshots that echo through the phone speaker. The video cuts off, but there's a text underneath saying they have the full thing, including the radio call. They want to meet tomorrow at the coffee shop on 5th Street downtown. Public place with lots of people around. Smart. I text back agreeing to noon and spend the rest of the night watching that 10-second clip over and over. Proof that I'm not crazy. Proof that something really happened. I get to the coffee shop 40 minutes early the next day and grab a corner table where I can see both exits. Every person who walks in makes my heart race. 2 cops come in for coffee, and I almost bolt before realizing their traffic division. Wouldn't know Briggs if they passed him on the street. I order a large coffee that I don't really want and wrap my hands around it to stop them from shaking. Noon comes and goes. Then 12:15. I'm about to leave when a guy in his 50s walks in looking as nervous as I feel. Dark hair going gray at the temples, work boots and paint-stained jeans. He scans the room until he sees me in my civilian clothes and walks over slowly. You left the note? His voice is quiet, and he keeps looking toward the door. I nod, and he sits down across from me. Says his name is Rafael Cardenas, and he lives in the house with the doorbell camera. Been there 12 years and seen too much. He pulls out a thumb drive and slides it across the table. Tells me cops have been using that empty house for years to test rookies. Make them shoot at nothing, then see if they'll lie about it. He's got 4 other incidents recorded, but mine is the clearest. Shows Briggs setting the whole thing up. I ask why he's helping me, and he looks down at his coffee. Says his nephew wanted to be a cop 5 years ago. Failed one of these tests and ate his gun a week later. Rafael couldn't prove anything then, but maybe now he can help someone else. He doesn't want to testify or go on record, though. Too scared of what might happen. Gives me the thumb drive and tells me to be careful. These people protect each other. Back at my apartment, I plug in the drive with shaking fingers. The full video is 12 minutes long, and watching it from the outside makes me want to throw up. You can see Briggs checking his watch before he starts screaming. Totally calm 1 second, then full panic the next. My shots ring out, and flour dust drifts through the broken door. Then the worst part. Briggs on the radio saying I'm dangerous and they know what to do with me next. All while I'm standing there covered in flour thinking I just killed someone. I watch it 3 more times, taking notes on everything. Time stamps, audio levels, the exact words Briggs uses. This is evidence that could end his career or get me killed. Maybe both. I create a new email account on a computer at the library. Can't risk using my personal devices. Type out a message to internal affairs, keeping it vague but clear. Training irregularities, video evidence, request for confidential meeting. My finger hovers over send for 5 minutes before I finally click it. 2 hours later, there's a response. Cheryl Reed from Iowa wants to meet tomorrow at the main library downtown. Conference room B at 2 o'clock. Come alone and bring the evidence. Her response time tells me they've been waiting for something like this. The next day, I'm at the library 30 minutes early, walking the stacks and trying to look normal. Conference room B is in the back corner away from everything. Good for privacy. Bad if something goes wrong. Cheryl Reed shows up exactly at 2. Mid-40s with short brown hair and a face that gives nothing away. She locks the door behind her and sits down without shaking hands. I tell her everything from the beginning while she takes notes in shorthand. Never interrupts, never reacts. Just writes. When I'm done talking, I show her the video on my laptop. She watches it twice without speaking. Then she closes the laptop and looks at me for the first time. Tells me I'm not the first rookie to report Briggs, but I'm the first with proof. 2 others came forward over the years but couldn't back up their stories. One moved out of state. The other one, she doesn't say what happened, but I can guess. She explains the next steps. Official statement. Chain of custody for the video. Investigation that could take months. Warns me that Briggs has friends everywhere. People who've covered for him before and will again. I need to be careful and document everything. That night, I pull up the department's body cam policy on my computer and start memorizing. Section 247.3 about continuous recording. Section 248.1 about supervisor oversight. Section 249.7 about evidence preservation. I write them on index cards and practice reciting them in the mirror. Knowledge is armor, even if it's made of paper. 2 days later, I'm back on shift with Briggs, and he's got another test ready. We respond to a disturbance call at a bar I've never heard of. When we get there, a drunk guy is yelling at nobody in particular. Briggs tells me to handle it, and I can tell the guy is acting. His drunk stumble is too practiced, his slurred words too clear. Briggs orders me to take him down hard, says he's being aggressive and we need to establish control. The guy takes a swing that misses by a foot, and Briggs shouts for me to turn off my camera and get physical. I keep my camera on and step back with my hands visible. Quote Section 247. 3 about continuous recording during citizen contacts. Then I talk to the drunk guy calmly. Ask him if he's okay, if he needs medical attention. Offer to call him a cab. The guy looks confused, like this isn't how the script was supposed to go. Briggs's jaw clenches so tight I can hear his teeth grinding. The drunk guy wanders off and Briggs doesn't say a word the rest of the shift. I get home that night, and there's a voicemail from Derek Woods at the union. Friendly tone, but the message is clear. He's heard I've been making waves as a probationary employee. Suggests we talk about my future with the department. Reminds me that rookies who can't adapt don't last long. Doesn't mention IA, but he doesn't have to. The word is out. I spend the rest of the night researching Garrity rights on my laptop, learning what protections I really have versus what they want me to think. The union has to represent me even if they don't want to. Has to provide a lawyer if I'm questioned. I write down Derek's exact words in my notebook with the time and date. Every threat is evidence. Every conversation matters now. 3 days later, Cheryl called me at home and said she'd set up a meeting with someone from the prosecutor's office who wanted to look at everything we had. I drove downtown to the big glass building where the district attorney worked and took the elevator to the 7th floor. The hallway was empty, except for a security guard who checked my ID twice before letting me into a conference room. Cheryl was already there with a woman in her 40s wearing a dark suit who introduced herself as Linnea Russo from the prosecutor's office. She had short black hair and looked at me like she was trying to figure out if I was worth her time. I sat down, and Cheryl pushed a folder across the table while Linnea opened her laptop. She watched the doorbell video 3 times without saying anything, and then looked at the screenshots I'd taken of department policies. Her fingers tapped on the table as she read through my notes about that night. She finally looked up and told me the video was good, but not enough on its own. She explained that Briggs would say it was a training exercise, and his lawyer would argue that turning off body cams during training scenarios wasn't unusual. Without the actual radio recording where he called me dangerous to the department, we just had my word against his. She said criminal charges needed proof beyond a reasonable doubt, and right now, we were nowhere close. Cheryl nodded and said she'd already put in a request for the radio logs and dispatch records from that night. The IT department was supposed to pull everything within 48 hours. Linnea wrote down some notes and said she also needed witness statements from anyone else who might have seen or heard something. 2 days passed before Cheryl called with bad news. The IT department claimed there were technical problems recovering the files from that specific night. They said a system update had corrupted some data, and the radio logs might be partially or completely lost. I could hear the frustration in her voice when she told me this kind of thing happened too often when cops investigated other cops. Linnea wasn't surprised when I called to tell her. She said obstruction was hard to prove because there were always convenient excuses like technical glitches or lost paperwork. That evening, my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. When I opened it, my stomach dropped. The message said, "Heard you've been busy. Remember, rookies who can't handle training sometimes have accidents." I knew it was Briggs even though the number wasn't saved in my phone. My hands shook as I took a screenshot and immediately forwarded it to both Cheryl and Linnea. The threat was vague enough that he could claim it meant anything, but clear enough that I understood exactly what he was saying. I barely slept that night thinking about what kind of accident he might arrange. The next morning, I filled out a transfer request form asking to be assigned to a different training officer. I wrote that there were personality conflicts affecting my ability to learn and kept it professional without mentioning the investigation. The form went to the shift supervisor, who said he'd review it within the week. 3 days later, the request came back denied. The reason given was staffing limitations and the need to maintain training continuity. I was stuck with Briggs whether I wanted to be or not. My next shift started at 4 in the afternoon, and Briggs was already in the patrol car when I got there. He didn't mention the text or the investigation, but his eyes stayed on me longer than usual. We drove around for an hour before he suddenly pulled over near a row of old houses on the south side. He pointed to one with a broken fence and said he smelled marijuana coming from inside. I knew this game. He wanted me to go along with an illegal search. I stayed in my seat and said, "Smell alone didn't give us probable cause to enter without a warrant according to the state Supreme Court ruling from 2 years ago." His face turned red, and he got out of the car and walked around to my side. He opened my door and leaned in close enough that I could smell the coffee on his breath. He told me to stop being difficult and follow his lead. I looked straight at my body cam to make sure it was recording, and said clearly that entering without a warrant would violate the Fourth Amendment. He stepped back and slammed my door hard enough to shake the whole car. We sat there for 5 minutes in silence before he finally started driving again. The rest of the shift, he didn't say a word to me. The next day, I found a write-up in my mailbox at the station. Briggs had filed an official complaint saying I was insubordinate and creating officer safety issues by questioning his decisions in the field. The form said my behavior showed poor judgment and an inability to work as part of a team. I knew this was going in my permanent file. I spent 2 hours writing a formal response documenting that he had ordered me to conduct an illegal search, and I had refused based on department policy and state law. I made copies of everything and gave one to Cheryl and kept one at home. That night, I pulled out all my training evaluations from the past month and started reading them carefully. There were certain words that kept showing up. Rookies who passed their tests were described as adaptable and flexible. The ones who failed were called rigid or uncooperative. The pattern made me sick when I realized how many rookies had probably been pushed out for refusing to break the law. I was making a chart of all the coded language when my phone rang. It was Cheryl, and she sounded excited for the first time since this started. The radio tech had managed to recover partial audio from that night, including a fragment where you could clearly hear Briggs saying, "Dangerous to us." It wasn't the complete recording, but it was enough to prove I wasn't making it up. She said Linnea was reviewing it now and would call me tomorrow. When Linnea called the next morning, she said the recovered audio changed everything. Combined with the video and the threatening text, she could now file charges for official misconduct and tampering with records. She warned me that prosecuting cops was always hard, and most cases ended with acquittals or plea deals. She also said she really needed Raphael to testify, but understood why he was scared. She asked if I could talk to him about providing an official statement. I called Raphael the next morning and asked if he'd meet with Linnea at her office downtown instead of the police station. His voice got quiet for a long time before he finally said yes, but only if I promised to keep his name out of everything as much as possible. 2 days later, we sat in Linnea's conference room where Raphael signed page after page of sworn statements about what his camera captured that night. His hands shook as he wrote, but he kept going, telling Linnea he'd seen too many young cops get broken by whatever sick game Briggs was playing. When we left the building, Raphael grabbed my arm and told me to watch my back, because people like Briggs don't go down easy. That afternoon, my phone rang with Derek Woods asking me to come to the union office for what he called an informal chat about my situation. I walked into a small conference room where 3 senior officers sat around a table, looking at me like I was something stuck to their shoe. They spent 20 minutes explaining how difficult my life would become if I kept pushing this investigation. One of them slid a paper across the table, showing a transfer to records division with day shift hours and weekends off if I just dropped everything and moved on. Another one leaned forward and promised they'd make sure I never got back up when I needed it if I didn't take the deal. I stood up and thanked them for making their position so clear, then walked out without signing anything. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely open my car door, but I sat there for 10 minutes writing down every word they'd said on a legal pad I kept in my glove box. I wrote their names, the time, the exact threats they made, and even drew a diagram of where everyone sat in the room. Back at my apartment, I typed it all up in a formal memo and emailed copies to both Cheryl and Linnea with the subject line, "Documentation of Union Meeting Threats." The next morning, Cheryl called me to her office and pulled out a file folder with papers that made my stomach drop. She showed me a complaint from 2 years ago that looked almost exactly like mine, except the rookie's name was blacked out with marker. Same empty house, same flower bags, same turned-off body cam, same threats afterward. The rookie had quit after 3 months and moved to another state, but their complaint was still sitting in the file doing nothing. Cheryl said she'd found similar patterns going back at least 5 years, with different training officers all using the same sick test. My next shift started at 4, and Briggs was already in the car when I got there, with that same dead look in his eyes. We drove for about an hour before he pulled into an alley behind some warehouses and pointed to a door he claimed looked suspicious. He turned to me and ordered me to turn off my body cam for officer safety, but I kept my hand away from the button and said clearly that department policy requires all citizen contacts to be recorded. His face turned red, and he repeated the order louder, but I stated for the camera that Officer Briggs was ordering me to violate Department Policy Section 247(3) regarding mandatory recording. He got out and walked around to my side of the car and yanked my door open so hard it bounced back. He leaned in close and said he was making a supervisory correction that didn't need to be recorded according to training protocols. I stepped back and said loud enough for the camera to pick up that all interactions during field training require documentation per the training manual. 2 other patrol cars were parked nearby, but the officers inside just stared straight ahead like they couldn't see us. Briggs suddenly stepped forward and bumped into me hard enough to knock my camera sideways on its mount. The video went crazy, but the audio kept recording as he leaned in and whispered that I was making the biggest mistake of my pathetic life. I stayed calm and announced the time while readjusting my camera and stating that my recording equipment had been displaced during contact with my training officer. The rest of the shift was silent except for Briggs breathing heavy through his nose like an angry bull. The next day I got a call from Derek Woods saying he'd filed a grievance on my behalf about harassment from training officers. I almost dropped the phone because this was the same guy who'd threatened me 2 days earlier. He explained that by filing the grievance, the union was creating an official paper trail that would make it harder for the department to fire me without cause. It wasn't real protection, but it was bureaucratic armor that might buy me time. Linnea called that afternoon to say she was drafting formal criminal charges against Briggs for official misconduct and tampering with records. She had enough with the video and partial audio, but wanted the complete radio logs to make it airtight. The IT department had been dragging their feet for weeks, but suddenly got cooperative when Linnea mentioned obstruction of justice charges for anyone blocking access to evidence. Within 2 days, they miraculously recovered more audio, including Briggs clearly saying the words dangerous to us. Cheryl came by my apartment that night with a 6-pack of soda and a stack of papers that made everything even worse. Her investigation had uncovered at least 6 other training officers using the same fear test on rookies over the past decade. They had code words for it in their evaluations, where rookies who passed were called flexible, and the ones who failed were labeled rigid. The whole system was designed to filter out cops who wouldn't play along with whatever corruption was happening. She showed me charts and timelines that proved this wasn't just Briggs being a bad apple, but something bigger and more organized that reached into every part of the department. The weight of it all made my hands shake as I put the papers back in the folder. Cheryl told me that internal affairs had a plan, and I needed to trust them for my next shift with Briggs. She wouldn't give me details, but said they'd be watching everything that happened tomorrow night. I spent the rest of the day trying to act normal, while my stomach churned with anxiety about what was coming. When I showed up for my shift at 4, Briggs was already sitting in the patrol car checking his equipment, like nothing had changed. His eyes looked tired, and there were new lines around his mouth that hadn't been there before. We pulled out of the station parking lot and started our usual route through the east side neighborhoods. About 20 minutes into the shift, I noticed a dark sedan that kept showing up behind us at different intersections. The car stayed back far enough to seem random, but close enough to keep us in sight. Briggs was too busy talking about a new training scenario he wanted to run to notice the tail. He kept describing this abandoned warehouse on 5th Street, where we could practice building searches without anyone bothering us. My hands gripped the door handle as he drove us deeper into the industrial district, where streetlights were broken and security cameras didn't exist. The sedan followed us turn for turn but stayed just far enough back to avoid suspicion. Briggs pulled up to a chain-link fence with a no trespassing sign and got out to cut the lock with bolt cutters from the trunk. He worked quickly while I watched the sedan park about a block away with its lights off. We drove through the fence and up to a loading dock where Briggs started disconnecting the dashboard camera in our patrol car. He pulled wires loose and tucked them behind the console while explaining this was for operational security during training. Then he turned to me and ordered me to shut off my body cam for the exercise. I kept my hand away from the button and stated clearly that department policy required all training to be recorded. His face turned red as he repeated the order louder and reached across the car toward my chest camera. The sedan's doors flew open, and 3 people in suits ran toward our car shouting for Briggs to step back. A supervisor I recognized from headquarters pointed at Briggs and ordered him to move away from me immediately. Briggs froze with his hand still reaching for my camera as 2 more supervisors surrounded the patrol car. They ordered both of us out of the vehicle and told us to hand over our service weapons for the investigation. Briggs's face went from confused to angry to scared in about 3 seconds as he realized what was happening. The supervisor took our guns and radios while another one photographed the disconnected dashboard camera. They put Briggs in the back of their car while telling me I'd be riding back to the station with them separately. My legs were shaking, so bad I could barely stand as they loaded me into another vehicle. The whole ride back, nobody said anything while I stared out the window trying to process that it was actually over. At the station, they put me in a conference room and explained I was placed on administrative duty for my safety. They said Briggs would be questioned about tonight's incident and all the previous complaints against him. I'd work days in the records room while the investigation continued, which meant no more patrols with Briggs. That night, I went home and slept for 12 hours straight, without any nightmares for the first time in weeks. The next morning, Cheryl called to say she had something important to show me at her office. She handed me a transcript of Briggs's interview from the night before, and I read it 3 times to believe what I was seeing. His story changed every few pages about why the cameras needed to be off and what kind of training we were doing. First, he said it was for officer safety. Then he claimed it was department protocol. Then he said I requested it. Each lie made our case stronger as he tangled himself up trying to explain the unexplainable. Cheryl said the contradictions were exactly what they needed to prove misconduct. 2 days later, the radio technician who'd been working on recovering the audio files finally had a breakthrough. He managed to pull the complete recording from that first night, including every word Briggs said after the flower shooting. The audio was clear as day, with Briggs saying I was dangerous to them and asking what to do with me next. Linnea called me immediately after hearing it and said this was the evidence that would guarantee criminal charges. She started drafting the paperwork that afternoon for official misconduct and tampering with government records. The charges weren't as serious as attempted murder, but they were enough to end his career and possibly send him to jail. Within a week, she filed everything with the court, and Briggs was officially suspended without pay pending trial. The department sent out a press release about reviewing all training policies and suspended 6 other supervisors for investigation. The wording was careful to avoid admitting any real problems, but at least something was happening. They announced new rules about body cams during training and promised better oversight of field training officers. It felt like too little too late, but change was finally starting. Linnea met with Raphael to discuss his doorbell footage and how to protect his identity during the legal proceedings. She set up witness security protocols that would keep his name out of public records while still using his evidence. Raphael seemed relieved when she promised there would be no retaliation and the department would ensure his safety. He told her he was still installing extra cameras around his house, just to be safe because he didn't trust the system completely. The evidence was locked away in the prosecutor's office, where nobody from the department could access it without authorization. That weekend, I sat at my kitchen table with a yellow legal pad making lists that went nowhere. The left column had reasons to quit, like almost getting killed, corrupt partners, and a system that protects itself. The right column just had student loans written over and over with the monthly payment amount circled. I made 6 different versions of the same list while drinking cheap coffee and eating ramen because my bank account was already stretched thin. The apartment felt smaller than usual with all my doubts taking up space. I kept picking up my phone to call my parents, but couldn't figure out what to say that wouldn't make them worry. Saturday turned into Sunday, and the lists got longer, but the answer stayed the same. I needed the paycheck and hated myself for it. My badge sat on the counter looking like evidence of something I couldn't name. Monday morning, Cheryl called before my alarm went off and asked me to meet her at the station early. She led me to a small office on the 3rd floor that I'd never seen before and closed the door behind us. She explained that I needed someone who understood what rookies went through with bad training officers. The position was temporary, but it would keep me off the streets while helping investigate training complaints. The pay was the same, and I'd work regular hours without the danger of patrol. I said yes before she finished explaining, because anything was better than wondering if today was the day another Briggs would test me. The paperwork took an hour, and suddenly I had a desk job investigating the people who were supposed to protect and serve. Tuesday afternoon, Derek showed up at my new desk with a folder full of legal documents. He laid out the terms like a business deal, which I guess it was. The department wanted this to go away quietly, and I wanted my record clean. If I agreed not to talk to reporters or post anything online, they'd remove all of Briggs's negative evaluations and support new training policies. The union would also back reforms that prevented this from happening to other rookies. Derek's hands shook slightly as he pushed the papers toward me, and I realized he was scared too. Not of me, but of what this whole mess meant for cops who'd been doing things the old way for years. We signed everything in triplicate and shook hands like two people at a funeral. Neither of us pretended we'd ever speak again after this. Thursday morning, Linnea called with news about Briggs. He'd taken a plea deal the night before rather than risk trial. 2 years deferred adjudication, mandatory counseling, and he'd never work in law enforcement again. She said it wasn't enough, but explained that juries rarely convict cops even with video evidence. At least he couldn't hurt any more rookies. I thanked her and hung up feeling empty instead of victorious. Justice apparently came in smaller portions than I'd expected. The next week, the department sent out a memo about General Order 247, 7 requiring body cams to stay on during all training scenarios. The language was careful and bureaucratic, but I recognized phrases from my own reports buried in the policy. Knowing my worst night had led to this small change made the job feel less pointless. Other departments started calling to ask about our new policies, and I helped write the responses. Real change moved like molasses, but at least it was moving. 2 months passed in a blur of case files and interviews with scared rookies who'd had their own versions of my experience. My desk became covered with reports and timelines as I learned to spot the patterns of abuse. The nightmares faded from every night to once a week, though I still checked exits in every room and kept my back to walls. Recovery wasn't a straight line, but more like a drunk person trying to walk home. Some days were better, and some days I'd hear a door slam and be right back in that dark house with flour exploding around me. The coffee shop on 5th Street was busy when I met Raphael on a Thursday afternoon. He looked healthier than the last time I'd seen him, and we talked about the weather and the local team's losing streak. I slid his thumb drive across the table wrapped in a receipt, and he pocketed it smoothly. We both knew this was goodbye, but there was respect in how we didn't need to say it. He told me he was glad I was okay, and I believed him. Back at my desk that afternoon, I finally texted my parents that work was going well, and I was happy with my new position. It was mostly true if you didn't count the therapy sessions or the way I still flinched at unexpected sounds. My badge holder was different now with IA credentials instead of patrol, and my gun stayed locked in my desk drawer most days. The office was quiet compared to the chaos of patrol, and I was starting to prefer it that way. Protecting rookies from what happened to me wasn't the career I'd imagined, but maybe it was the one that mattered. Well, folks, that's gonna wrap it up for today. Hope you had fun just wondering about stuff with me for a bit. Until we cross paths again, if you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.